Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. You are still tuned in to Bush Radio. This is 89.5 FM, and you're listening to Saki C's Way, Building the Nation, Pauri Nasi. The next item on our agenda is slavery. Slavery. It's a concept that we've all encountered in some way or another, either in a history lesson or as one of our co-workers jokes about having too much work in the office. But the relevance of slavery persists even in today's increasingly equal and connected world. So later in today's show, we will talk about how the South African Constitution guarantees the right against slavery, servitude, and forced labor. But we want to break down and understand what the word slavery actually means before we do that. We're joined today by Mr. Liam Goodacre, an educator and a scholar who has been developing an interdisciplinary curriculum that focuses on slavery from various perspectives, including the historical, the philosophical, and the linguistic. This interview is special to me because I actually studied under Mr. Goodacre in India for a year, and I look back fondly towards our readings and critical discussions. Liam, I promise I will not be asking any questions about Hegel or the phenomenology of spirit. But thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Hi, Jasmine.
Hello, Liam.
Hi, Madhav.
Hello.
Hi.
Just to start off, what is the difference between slavery and service? And what are some identifying characteristics you would, label slavery with?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and there's a lot of debate around the definition of slavery. I think the first major difference between slavery and service is the notion of slavery being involuntary. It's usually a forced, almost always a forced condition where, somebody is forced to work and to exist as a slave against their will. And the other side of that also is that it's usually deliberate on behalf of the enslaver. So there's usually somebody who is there to exploit and to oppress people who have been enslaved. And I think that those two words, both oppression and exploitation, are sort of some of the key characteristics of slavery. It's inherently exploitative in that the enslaver is extracting something, usually labor, out of the enslaved person. And it's also highly, highly oppressive in that it's tied to degradation, it's tied to dehumanization, it's tied to erasure of identity. So it's really all of the worst elements of humanity sort of dialed up to 11, I would say.
So as you're describing that, and as I reflect on when I first heard the word slavery, I'm thinking of, the transatlantic slave trade in North America, or I'm thinking of Middle Eastern empires hundreds of years ago. But does slavery continue to exist in 2023? And what does that look like? And in what context does it most commonly happen?
Sure, it's an important question. A lot of listeners might be surprised to know that there are more people enslaved today than at any other time in human history. The International Labour Organization estimates that 50 million people today live under slavery, which, just for context, is 1 in every 150 people alive today. Now, these are staggering numbers. And so, while we think of slavery as something from the past, as you mentioned with the transatlantic slave trade, which was no doubt, one of the most dreadful periods of history. But clearly slavery itself is not something that's behind us. So of those 50 million people, over half of them are living under forced labor and also forced marriage. And the country with the number one amount of slaves in the world is India. And Southeast Asia in general is a hotspot for slavery, but really it's a global problem. So far as I'm aware, every country in the world does have a problem of slavery today.
Definitely, Liam. I agree with you fully on that. And as we also do know, South Africa has a great history when it comes to slavery pre-1994. So does slavery, or why do you feel it is important for everyone to basically talk about or have a understanding when it comes to the history of slavery?
I mean, to me, I feel like the history of slavery is the history of humanity. We're talking about an institution that has always been there in every country, in every period of history. And to me, when I study slavery, I feel like I'm getting insights into sort of how the world, how economies and how societies and cultures have really, really worked. It's also very much tied to identity because, the institution of slavery was so highly racialized by Europeans and by colonialism, and colonialism and slavery just sort of went hand in hand. And so if we want to address and hopefully correct the problems of the past, we have to face slavery head on, the history of slavery. And as I mentioned, it's still, a problem today that we need to be tackling.
So I understand as you speak that language is clearly very important. You're thinking about the words you're saying, and especially when talking about a topic like slavery, which is, been to the detriment of so many people and communities throughout history and today. Why is it important what language you use? Like I know, for example, people have perspectives on saying slaves versus enslaved people. To a layman, that might seem like a pedantic and unimportant distinction. But why does it matter?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I mean, like I mentioned, slavery has been tied in so much to identity, and in particular racial identity. And some people who are descended from slaves feel like the word itself carries the connotations of the past and carries the weight of history with it. I think so a lot of the debate these days is around the question slave versus enslaved person. And so if you use the word enslaved person, rather than it being a quality of who you are, which is obviously an archaic notion from the past, it is instead something that's been done to you, something that you have suffered and survived and, maybe overcome. And likewise, also with the other side of it is with this word master, which obviously carries a sort of this connotation of moral superiority, which is far from the truth. And so often these days, people prefer to use the term enslaver, which doesn't carry the same sort of notion of superiority. And there are debates around this. I mean, some historians and some other activists today also feel like the word, if we rename these things, we're sort of pretending that they were other than they were, and we should just use the terms that people from the past used, which is the word slave. So it's an interesting debate, and I think one important thing is just to listen to people who are descendants of enslaved people, and to listen to people who have survived slavery, and to try and take their lead on how to use language around these matters.
And you're still tuned into Sakkie Sizwe Building the Nation, Bodhi Nasi, and today we are speaking a little bit more on slavery. So Liam, just listening to what you stated, which comes down to, as you mentioned, it is still happening up until 2023. So where can we learn more about slavery? Like what resources or ways would you recommend for people who want to join the movement to end slavery?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's being done on it, and there's a lot of good books and organizations all around the world who talk about slavery. I'm mostly familiar with authors from the West. So Kevin Bales is an outstanding academic. He's a legal professor and a professor of economics, and he's spent the past 10 years focusing on modern slavery and bringing it to the world's attention. There are some really good TED Talks by him, and he also has a series of books. I think his most famous is called Disposable People, which is very much focused on contemporary slavery all around the world. Also, one of my favorite recent books is a book by Laura Murphy. It's called Freedomville, and it's a very short history and case study of contemporary slavery in northern India. And also freedom in northern India. It's a story of a slave rebellion in, I think, 2004. It's a fantastic book because it's really short. It's just 100 and something pages, and it just communicates so much in that time. There's also many, as I mentioned, charities and organizations that work. Anti-Slavery International and Free the Slaves. They both have really good websites, and they've been working. Anti-Slavery is actually the oldest charity in the world, and it's been working to free enslaved people for over 100 years. And finally, one other organization which I'm learning a lot from these days is a US-based organization named Survivors Alliance, which works with people who rehabilitating people who survived slavery, finding them educational opportunities, providing the kinds of support that they need. And I think it's really important to remember that it's not, we can, changing laws and abolishing slavery is one thing. And obviously if we can help to do that, it's a big step in the right direction. But also learning from history, learning how to rehabilitate people who suffered this so that history doesn't repeat itself is very important.
So Liam, you're clearly intimately linked with these movements and, of course, with the curriculum that you are designing, which you call slavery studies. I want to know if you're open to talking about this. What goes into designing a curriculum that talks about slavery? What do you hope comes out of slavery studies? I know you have a summer course coming up in a couple of months. Tell us a little bit more about slavery studies as a concept that you are behind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been designing a course which looks at slavery from a multidisciplinary perspective, because I found that slavery is one thing that people from all different academic disciplines and indeed non-academic disciplines have something to say about. So there's so much literature, economics, arts, cultural studies, law, linguistics. It just goes on and on and on. So I've been trying to sort of curate that, bring it together, and then present it to classes of, really people of just 16 to 18 years old. And we get a kind of a history or a kind of a class that, we don't normally talk about slavery in schools or elsewhere. It's a topic that we usually avoid. And so I try and sort of bring it out into the open so that we can talk about it and learn about it. And one of the things that really goes into it, as you were asking, is just I've been doing this for years, and every day that I study it, I'm reminded again the horror of slavery and just what an awful institution it is. And so trying to come to terms with that and present it in a way that doesn't whitewash, that doesn't pretend that it was anything other than awful, but also keeps an optimistic tone. Because I really do think that in the 21st century, slavery is a solvable problem. It is, despite the fact that there are so many people enslaved today. Also, slavery is illegal in every country in the world, and it's prosecutable in every country in the world and under international law. So there really is we really have a chance today to fight slavery and to end it for good, or at least to reduce its prevalence drastically.
And thank you so much for being a part of the movement of people who are trying to make that happen. But just to close off, we've all been exposed to slavery in some way, either through the clothes we wear or the food we eat or where we live and who built that house. What questions can we ask ourselves on the daily? What can we reflect on to be more critically aware of our role in this dynamic of slavery that continues to persist in this world?
Sure. I think it's often a community and a societal question. As individuals, there's often not much we can do. But if we merely we bring it out into the open, as I said, because look, slavery persists today because it's hidden from view. It can only persist because it's hidden from view, because it's illegal. So the less hidden it is, the less likely it is to happen. So I think one thing we can do is just simply talk to others and ask other people to, ask business owners where their infrastructure comes from and where their supply chain comes from. And is there anything in that supply chain that might be linked to slavery markets around the world? There are also, I think it's a good idea to find out about laws in South Africa. I'm afraid I don't know too much about South African law, but to find out what laws exist to fight slavery and also how they can be strengthened. Because there's a growing movement right now around the world to sort of strengthen national laws and strengthen international laws to fight slavery. So I think slavery is really one area where just awareness can actually make a big difference.
Definitely, Liam, I couldn't agree with you more. And it is important that it also needs to be incorporated into the schooling curriculum. So are there any additional words in closing from your side?
It's been a pleasure. I'm really happy that you're focusing on this issue. And I hope that the listeners have learned something today. If I may just give one little plug for my own course, I'm running an online short course course this summer on slavery studies. It's 2 weeks long. It's happening at the end of June. And if you're interested, you can go to uwcmahindracollege.org and search for Slavery Studies summer short course there. If anybody the course is aimed at 16 to 19-year-olds, and we'd certainly love to have some participants from South Africa.
Thank you so much, Liam, and I will repeat that that address, of course, after we do conclude this interview. But it's been great talking to you. It's been great connecting again, and I hope you have a wonderful day ahead.
My pleasure. Thanks, Madhav. Thanks, Jasneen.
Have an awesome day. Bye, Liam.
Bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Liam Goodacre, who is a faculty of philosophy at UWC Mahindra College in India. And of course, like he said, he's running a short course on slavery studies at the end of June. You can find out more information about that at UWC Mahindra, that's MAHINDRA, college.org. And you can search for slavery studies, or you can go to the UWC Mahindra Instagram page. There are financial aid packages available. It's an online course, and they're trying to make it as accessible for as many people as possible.